Hi, welcome to the Hangout. I'm Amanda Frankel. I'll be moderating the Hangout today. We're so excited to share the Humanitarian Data Toolkit today, which is a physical box of tools and a ready-to-go research design that aims to help humanitarian responders to quickly gather, analyze, and act upon data during a crisis. And we are joined today by Mark Frohardt and Anahi Ayala from the Center for Innovation and Learning. And I'll just do sort of a brief and abridged bio for both of them before we begin. Mark is the Executive Director for Internews Center for Innovation and Learning. He has worked for years on the rapid delivery of life-saving information to populations after Frohardt's career in humanitarian relief had him working around the world, including coordinating health services for refugees on the Thai-Cambodian border, working for Doctors Without Borders in Chad and the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees in Sudan and Somalia, assisting with the repatriation of Kurds into northern Iraq after the first Gulf War, as well as managing UN human rights field operations in Rwanda following the genocide. And we also have Anahi Ayala, who is our Senior Innovation Advisor for Internews Center for Innovation and Learning. And before covering this role, Anahi also served as Internews' Media Innovation Advisor for the Africa region for health and humanitarian media. And Anahi is specialized on the use of on ICT4D, new technologies, social media, crisis mapping, and she's also the co-founder of the Standby Task Force, which is an online volunteer community for live mapping. And just a quick note before the Hangout begins. This is just a space for you to post your comments, your questions, and thoughts during the Hangout. So whatever questions that you have for the speakers, we'll hope you post them on the wall, and we'll make sure to address those at some point during the briefing. And anyway, so thanks again for joining us. I will pass it over to you now, Mark, and you'll tell us a little bit more about the pilot.
Okay, thank you. Just as a way of a little bit of background, one of the reasons why I personally moved into Internews after spending so much time doing humanitarian work is really because of the importance of information during crises. When we look at the ability of a community who has been hit by a crisis, whether it be a natural disaster, complex emergency, which often involves conflict as well as famine or other natural problems. One of the things which is most important in these situations is for the population themselves to be able to determine what is the best way to respond. Immediately after a crisis, the first responders are their neighbors, is the community itself, trying to figure out exactly how they should respond to what has happened. Humanitarian organizations do come in after a bit, but it is still ongoing with regard to how to respond in these situations, that it is actually the community that need to make the most important decisions. What we often refer to in these situations is the double information jeopardy. And what we mean by that is that as we all need information to be able to make decisions, whether it be, what time the bus is leaving or what the weather is going to be, in a crisis situation, the severity, the importance of those decisions and the severity of the possible outcome is dramatically increased, in that the decision might actually affect people's lives, affect your family, whether or not, where do you go to get food, whether or not you separate from your family, and then if you have to move, whether you are going to be moving through safe or dangerous territory. All of these things lead to an importance of information which is exceptionally accurate and also is very timely. On the other hand, the availability of information, while the need is dramatically higher, the availability of information is often decreased. Sometimes the existing infrastructure has been destroyed, particularly if people have been displaced. Even those natural networks of people they might go to, whether it be a religious leader, a community leader, local friends at a well, all of these systems and networks are often very disrupted. So the availability of reliable information is dramatically decreased. So in these situations, while the humanitarian organizations are providing services which are critical to for shelter, food, water, at the same time it is also critical for the local populations to have information. An example of how we have responded to this was in Haiti. We went in just a few days after the earthquake, and one of the first things that we had to do was, of course, is to determine what information people were getting and what information they needed, and also what were the most reliable sources of information. Were they still getting it from radio? Were they still getting it from friends? What were the most trusted sources of information? It's not just about infrastructure, but it's much more complex with regard to how information passes through these communities and how they're going to respond. And so we got together in Haiti shortly after arriving. We wanted to do a very quick assessment, and we had put together kind of our own approach, our own method, list of questions, and how we would do this to try and get the best assessment as quickly as possible. We got a group of people together that had been working with a sister organization and organized them. We knew that what we were asking was not that complex, and then sent them out to gather the information. And we didn't see several of them for many days in some cases, and the information turned out to be quite unreliable because we didn't realize at the time that you really cannot depend on people who have just been through such a traumatic event such as an earthquake. They had lost family members. Sometimes they were still trying to find out where those family members were or to find out where they could get food or water for them. And in some cases, they were really affected by the trauma of the event itself. And as much as they wanted to help, it was really unfair of us to even think that they would have the ability to do that in the first week right after that crisis. So we realized that we really needed to think this through. We initially did bring in someone who had great expertise, did an extensive training, put together teams that went out and gathered information. We created a humanitarian information service that got information out to the radio, text messaging back from the audience as to how they received that information, what other information they wanted to receive from us, also connecting them to the humanitarian organizations. But again, as well as that worked and as sophisticated as it was, it did take several weeks to really get it up to speed. And so for that reason, we realized that we really needed to find another way to do something very quickly in the early days, but then would also lay the foundation for something more elaborate and more sophisticated for the longer term. It was shortly after Haiti that we decided, Internews decided as an organization, that beyond just the humanitarian work that we were doing, it was really important for us to actually do more research and experimentation in the field that we were working. So at that time, we created the Center for Innovation and Learning here at Internews. What we do is essentially we have three areas that we focus on. One is research, the second is experimentation, and the third is learning. And that learning is both within the organization and then what we can share with the broader international development community. The research right now that is most relevant to this topic is focus on information ecosystems and really looking at communities, whether in crises or not, as how information flows through those communities to get a good sense of whether it be from the radio, from text messages, or at the well, how information flows, most reliable sources, and how our work can best contribute to the ability of a community to share accurate and reliable information in a timely fashion, and then also have a forum in which they can discuss events, changes which are going on in their communities, and come to some consensus on how best to respond. With regard to the pilots and the experimentation, one of the first pilots that we actually did in the early days was a pilot on the Humanitarian Data Toolkit, is to see how we might be able to create something that would allow us to move into an emergency very quickly and assess what were the information needs of a community in a distressed situation. So I will stop here and turn it over to Anahi, who can then give you more of the background on that pilot and the development of the Humanitarian Data Toolkit. Thank you.
So the first thing that we started looking at when we decided to do the Humanitarian Data Toolkit pilot was the fact that we had done before information needs assessment, as Mark was mentioning. And one of the main problem that we identified was the problem of time and the ability to collect data very quickly and being able to analyze and provide the analysis of this data to either local media or humanitarian organizations. And so before actually doing the Humanitarian Data Toolkit pilot, we did a kind of pre-pilot in Dadaab at the border in between Kenya and Somalia, where we decided for the first time to use mobile phones to do surveys. And what happened in that pilot was that we realized that relying only on the use of a specific technology to collect data was on one side giving us a lot of advantages, but on the other side was also presenting problems related to the fact that the use of mobile technology within a refugee camp can be a problematic issue, especially when it comes to security, both of the enumerators, but also security of the data. And so we ended up collecting much more data than we had done before using mobile technology, but we also ended up having people either losing their phone or finishing the battery, and so having to use papers anyway. At the end of the 1 week first pilot in Dadaab, we ended up with a lot of data collected on a paper and a lot of data collecting on the mobile phone. And the integration in between these two data sets actually took us almost the same amount of time than if we had collected data only using paper. So we started looking at the possibility of creating an integrated system, and the integrated system would have both paper and mobile phones, but would allow us to integrate these two data sets in the same time. The other issue that we wanted to tackle with the Humanitarian Data Toolkit project was that a lot of the times, especially in the aftermath of an emergency, there is no internet and very little electricity. And so we wanted to try to have a system, or a kit in this case, that would allow us to actually collect data and analyze data, even if there was no internet in that area, but especially even if there was very little electricity that could power computers or scanners or mobile phones. And so the Humanitarian Data Toolkit was specifically created to tackle those issues, and it was a collaboration in between Captricity, who is a paper digitalization company based out of San Francisco, and Moody Labs. And Moody Labs is a branch of Columbia University that had been experimenting and using and creating a software called Frohardt that allows people to create a survey, download it on the phone, and then use it on the ground to collect data. So the Humanitarian Data Toolkit project, on one side, worked on the integration in between the two softwares and in creating training material for the use of the two software. On the other side, had a practical implementation pilot, which was done again in Dadaab, in the 5 refugee camps at the border in between Kenya and Somalia. And then it had a research component on the top of it, which was basically the idea that whenever we create pieces of technology or we look at the creation of a toolkit, we need to use a much more user-centered design approach, which means that we need to have someone looking at our people interacting with whatever tool we are creating, and how can we learn from that interaction to make the tool easier to use and adapt it to their specific situation. So I'm gonna just share my screen for a second to show what the kit is. So this is the kit. You will see on the right side there is a very big solar panel, and the solar panel is specifically we spend quite a considerable amount of money for the solar panel because we wanted to have something powerful. So the solar panel powered a computer and 20 mobile phones and a scanner for around 3 days, and it takes around 24 hours to recharge completely. and it's waterproof. On the other side, you will see the kit, and here is a better slide on the different components of the kit. So the hardware part of the kit is a laptop, which works as a server and has already Frohardt as a software installed, and it has an extra battery, so the computer itself can work for 24 hours without electricity. There is then, of course, internet cable and Wi-Fi modem. Just as a detail, the Wi-Fi modem has been put there to create an internal Wi-Fi, not to connect to the internet. Of course, Android phones, paper forms for the surveys to be done on a paper, and then a scanner to scan the paper forms. Now, how does the kit actually works? So the first component, as I said, is the Frohardt and ODK component, Open Data Kit. And this is the component that it's specifically related to the use of mobile phone to collect data. So it allows people to create a survey on an Excel spreadsheet. So we don't need to download any specific software or have anything more than just the computer. You create a survey on an Excel spreadsheet, you upload it into Frohardt, and Frohardt transform it into a format that can be digested and used by Open Data Kit, which is an Android application. You basically transfer the survey to the phone, and then the phone doesn't need to be either connected to the internet or even have a SIM card. As long as it has an Android operating system, it's working perfectly. You train the enumerators, they go on the ground, and once they go on the ground, they collect the data. The data is saved automatically on the phone. And when they come back to the office at the end of the day, the data is automatically put on the on Frohardt, and it's transferred using the Wi-Fi modem. Once the data is on the Frohardt computer, then you can immediately download it as an Excel spreadsheet. The second workflow that we have is the workflow related to the use of Captricity. Now, Captricity is not open source, and it's a paid service, which is different from Frohardt, which is completely open source and free. In Captricity, you build your login and your account, and you create your paper forms, and you scan them and upload them into Captricity. Once you've done that, you're ready to go on the ground with your paper survey. You do normally your paper survey as you would always do. When you come back to the office at the end of the day, you scan the surveys and upload them into Captricity. And to do this, you definitely need internet. One of the ways we've gone around this is that if you have a very slow internet connection, you can still do this by dumping all your scanned survey into a Dropbox folder. And even if the internet is very slow, Dropbox will continue uploading your forms over time. And once everything is on the Captricity software, normally in around 12 hours, you have back an Excel spreadsheet with all of your surveys already coded within the spreadsheet. And that's when you basically end up with two different spreadsheets that you can put together, and you have one entire data set regardless of how you have collected the data. Now, what we were interested in, and the issues that I was talking about before in terms of tackle some problems that we had when we were doing humanitarian needs assessment, have actually given us very good results in this pilot. The first one is that the number of surveys that we could do by using this methodology increased by 30% over time. So there's a learning curve attached to it. The first time you do surveys using mobile phone, the enumerators are not familiar with the technology. So the first day is normally the day in which they do less survey. But over time, we managed to do 30% of the survey over the same amount of time and covering the same area. There's also a big difference in the numbers of mistakes. Our humanitarian surveys are pretty complex sometimes, and there's a lot of skip logic, and in the paper it's harder to do it because you have to read very well and you have to skip questions and make sure that you go to the right question when you're skipping. In the phone, this is automated, so we actually reduced mistakes during the survey from 50 mistakes per survey in the paper to 5 on the phone. So for every 50 mistakes that there will be on the paper survey, there will be 5 on the phone. And that was a huge increase in data quality that we observed. By the end of the 4th day of the data collection, we basically had absolutely no mistakes done by the enumerators in doing the surveys using mobile phones. The time for each survey also decreased by 15 minutes. It normally would take 45 minutes to do one complete long survey, and with the phone it would take 30 minutes. And that's the reason why the number of surveys increase. And also the time to clean and process the data after the data collection was decreased by 4 days. The first pilot we did in the DAB took us 4 days to clean the data at the end of it. With this pilot, it took us basically 1 day to do that. So the next step basically to this is that what we've also observed is that there are still other things that we want to solve with the toolkit. Well, one of the things is that, first of all, we want to allow people to use it. So it's completely open source, and it's completely out there on the internet. We have actually created a website that I'm going to show to you now. This is the website we've created, which is humanitariandatatoolkit.org. You can find the different components of the toolkit. You can also find the link to the softwares that are part of the toolkit. And there is a research paper that we wrote about that testing. One of the other things that we have created that is going to be uploaded very soon to the website is guidelines on how to do training for enumerators on the ground on using the kit. And that for us is very important because we normally recruit local population or refugees themselves to do the surveys, and we normally don't have a lot of time to train them. So we designed this training methodology that looks specifically at how we can train, let's say, 15 to 20 people on a span of 3 days on not just how to use the technology, but also on surveys methodology. How do you do a survey? How do you ask questions? How do you understand the way people are responding to you? What is an information an information ecosystem and an information need specifically. So we have also, the idea is that this kit has a hardware component, which you've seen, a software component, but also a research, or if you want, a methodology component. And that also is something that we want to share with the rest of the community, because we think that there are probably out there other organizations that are doing the same type of research or the same type of surveys, and sharing what we are learning from our methodology and what are other methodologies out there. It's probably one of the best way to come out with solutions that are actually working. So what is next? One of the things that we identified in the pilot was that it was very hard to try to come out with an analysis tool that would take the data that we had collected and created analytical charts or reports that we can provide immediately to people on the ground. So we didn't really manage to work on an analytical tool, specifically because all the tools that provide analysis for this data are online. And again, we wanted to try to work as much as possible offline. And so one of the things that we're trying to look at is how can we try to figure out ways in which we can give us enough analysis that we can immediately use and distribute this data. And for this reason, one of the other things that we are also looking at in terms of what is the future of this kit is that we want because when we started experimenting with this, those were the two best software that we could find out there. But over time, we know that other organizations right now are using a lot of other different softwares. We know that this is kind of like a very evolving, if you want, landscape in terms of new software coming out and new technologies being developed both for data collection and for paper digitalization. So we want to allow for people to be able to use the software that they prefer within the kit. And so one of the things that we're doing is to come out with the list of other type of softwares that do more or less the same type of things, but that people can choose independently from what we have chosen for our specific project. We are, for example, talking with the people developing Kobo Toolbox at the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative to look at how can we incorporate Kobo Toolbox within our kit. The idea is that we want to create something that is very easy to use, but can be adapted by organizations to their own needs when it comes to do surveys. And so this is definitely something that it's coming out, and we're trying to explore more possibility, especially in terms of paper digitalization, because Captricity so far looks at to be one of the main player in this field. So I'm actually gonna stop here and hand it back over to Mark to talk a little bit more about scaling up.
Yeah, I think that one of the most important things that that we have found is that, and we're, even before I was working with Internews, which focuses primarily on information, is, as I mentioned earlier, is the importance of populations to really figure out and take charge of their own response. As long as they are predominantly recipients of aid, and particularly passive recipients of aid, it becomes very difficult for them to really take charge of the direction and influence how that aid is being used. And one of the important things that we have found is that the better that we can really understand the information that they have, and then really through that create an exceptional interactive relationship in which they are understanding the complexities of a humanitarian response, and in that light are also being able to inform it and help direct it to the degree possible. The more quickly they'll actually be able to take charge of it themselves, reduce the length of time and the extent of the assistance which might be needed from external sources. So one of the things that we have found in a lot of the situations that we have worked is that people who have worked in multiple situations often make assumptions about a population, especially when you're in an emergency and you have to make the amount of time that you have to respond is really is truncated. And so because of that, trying to really put together tools such as this toolkit that really will assist in breaking down those assumptions and really getting at what are people in need to know about. I think this is something which really can help not only organizations working in our field, but also working, whether it be in delivery of humanitarian services or anyone who wants to have a more informed dialogue and better a more productive relationship with people for whom they're trying to bring assistance. We've done quite a bit of work on this with regard to the form of the kit. We've entered this into a design competition where we had several teams of designers actually come up with different models to make it more user-friendly. Both with regard to the websites, which can actually share this information, make it easier for a community to start to deploy it and then share information on lessons learned, as well as the actual structure and form of the kit itself. And so we're most excited to really continue to develop it and to really get it out there for other people to use and to really give us greater feedback on, so that we can make it the best possible and make it as open as possible. As Anahi mentioned, that other software can be used and it can be adapted how best people can use it. So I think maybe we want to stop there and open it up to questions, Amanda.
Hi. Hi, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so we had a question about testing the toolkit remotely.
Yeah.
So if you're not able to get on the ground.
So there's two different things. So in terms of testing it remotely using the mobile phone, definitely it's possible. Frohardt has developed an SMS component, and I know that they're also working on an kind of like forms component, which means that basically you can have two choices. One is that you just do surveys using SMS. So you basically send the question and then you get the answer and then you get the analysis of that. The other one is that you can ask people to download the application and do the survey themselves. So that is on the mobile component. Of course, on the paper component, not really, in the sense that you need someone to actually do the survey using the paper. What they can do is that if you have enumerators on the ground, they can entirely do the survey using paper, and then they scan it and upload it on a Dropbox folder, and then you can automatically get the Excel spreadsheet from Captricity, which is entirely online. So there are different ways to go around it, but definitely there are possibilities of using it in a completely remote management setting.
Great, great. Thank you. And then we just had one more question. How much is the cost per kit if humanitarian agencies are interested in using this technology?
So this is another thing, part of the modular approach. If you want to get the exactly same type of technology that we have used, meaning a specific and very powerful computer, and the phones that we got, which are smaller, and so they don't attract a lot of attention, but also a little bit more difficult to do the survey and so on. Our kit specifically was $5,000 for the kit overall, and around $2,500 for the solar panel. Now everything can be changed. You can get better phones that have a larger screen and spend more on that, and maybe a less powerful type of computer, or you can get a bigger or a smaller solar panel. But for this one, it was around $7,500, the cost of the entire kit, without counting the money that you have to pay for using Captricity as a paper digitalization software.
Okay, thank you, Anahi. Oh, I don't think we have any other questions, but I just want to thank Anahi and Mark again for joining us and sharing this amazing new toolkit with us, and thank you to all of you for participating. Bye, Mark. Bye, Anahi.
Bye.
Bye.